over 2 years ago when the planning board kicked off. I am A.G. Lafley. As some of you know, I spent 36 years at the soap company called the Procter & Gamble Company in Cincinnati, Ohio. I lived in Asia for 8 of those years. I spent the last 12 years as chairman and CEO, but that's not why I'm here. I'm here because I'm a interested and involved citizen of Sarasota. We moved here part-time in 2004, and as I was telling a couple of you before we started, on one of the keys and the traffic overcame us and we got religion and we moved downtown where we could walk and get to things a lot easier. But my real interest is community and civic spaces and public parks. As some of you may know, from 2002 to 2010, I chaired a not-for-profit in Cincinnati called Center City Development. We did a number of projects, but 3 of the projects I was involved in was the transformation of Fountain Square, which is the heart of downtown Cincinnati, Smale Riverfront Park, which is 50 acres of park, which stretches along the Ohio River, and was completed. It was one of those overnight successes. It took 15 or 16 years to execute the park, excuse me, in 5, 6, or 7 phases. And Sasaki, by the way, is our partner here and was our partner there. And then we did a couple of city parks. We did Washington Park, which was about 10 acres, and Ziegler Park. So I'm interested in community, I'm interested in parks, I'm interested in public-private partnerships. I got a phone call when I was in Indianapolis helping my mother-in-law get through her first knee replacement a few falls ago, and they asked if I would join the planning board that was forming the Sarasota Bayfront Planning Organization. I agreed to do it, and no good deed goes unpunished. I went to the bathroom, I came back, I was chair of the planning board for 2 years. We sunsetted in December because the city commission approved the conceptual master plan for the 53 acres in September and October. They approved the financing strategy and an overarching plan and sort of plan for the first phase of the park, which is 10 acres, which Bill and I will be talking about in a moment. They approved the governance, moving to a not-for-profit park conservancy form of governance to do 3 things: develop the park, actually turn the design and plan into parkland, green space, to help the government fund the park from private and philanthropic sources, and ultimately to help the city manage the park. Just in April, after 4 tries, 4 at-bats, 4 swings, 1 more than you get in baseball, the city approved our long-term 15-year partnership agreement with the Park Conservancy. So we're sort of 5+ years into the process, and I always say we're at the starting line. We still don't have any park. I want to ask Bill to introduce himself because this guy's actually built a lot of parks and designed a lot of parks. And then we'll go through a very brief slide presentation and allow more than half the time, or whatever you've got, for questions, comments, suggestions. I guess the last thing I would say is Bill and I spend a lot of our time meeting in person, small groups, medium-sized groups, and large groups in the community. We are now working our way around all the neighborhoods that are going to touch up against the park, in addition to the CCNA neighborhoods across the city and a whole bunch of stakeholders. And if you have a chance, this weekend we're putting up our latest iteration of our website, but in addition to the Bay, Sarasota.org, we've been running a site called Ask the Bay, and over 30,000 Sarasotans have been on it in the last 6, 7, 8 weeks. They ask us questions, we answer them every week, we post videos, we try to keep you up to date on what's going on, and more importantly, we try to keep the conversation and the dialogue going. And obviously, using social media and the website, we can reach a lot more people in the community a lot more efficiently and frankly at your convenience and on your schedule. So, Bill.
Brief background on me. I spent, my background is I'm a certified planner and a licensed landscape architect. Went to Texas A&M, spent 31 years with the planning and engineering firm Kimley Horn. 17 of it here, managing the local Kimley-Horn office for part of that time, and did a lot of different kinds of projects, but I've always had a passion for civic projects, and so I worked on and designed and built a little bit more than 30 parks, most of them in Florida, some out of Florida, and then about half of those up and down the west coast of Florida, from north of Tampa Bay all the way down to Marco Island and Naples. And so my passion is designing and building parks and building great civic spaces for communities. And when I decided to retire and redeploy, because I'm too young to retire, from Kimley-Horn, this incredible opportunity to be a part of this initiative and work for the next 5 or 10 years to implement this amazing waterfront park in Sarasota was an opportunity I couldn't pass up. So I have a lot of background in helping to deliver and design in phases big park projects like this one, and so I look forward to answering your questions, hearing more feedback, and working with you and your team as we move forward to implement a great place.
Yeah, and this is a dialogue that, as Patrick said earlier, has been going on for 5 years, and by the way, will continue forever, because parks get built in phases, they operate, and you need continuous feedback to operate a park so it meets the needs of the community and it meets the needs of park goers and park users. The next 2 slides simply show that from the beginning, the Bayfront 2020 Coalition Building organization went to the community. Many of you may have attended their meetings, and they put together a vision and 6 guiding principles, which were taken to all of the neighborhoods, taken to the city commission, endorsed, and which led to the formation of this planning board. Those on the next slide, those principles are translated to concept and design principles, so cultural heritage and vitality, Bayfront natural assets, a green and blue oasis, an enlivened destination, et cetera, and of course economically sustainable, otherwise it doesn't work. And the interesting thing that we are always wrestling with on the design and planning side and with the community on the use and activation side is the balance. Can we get the balance right between all the things that all of you would like to be able to do when you go to the park? The next piece, the next slide simply shows the before and after. This is the one I have on my bulletin board in my study because it just reminds me that 75% of the 53 acres are still surface parking lot, and in many cases abandoned or underutilized rooftops of buildings, some of which haven't been used, some of which are underused. When we started, we had 3 buildings that basically weren't used at all on sites. If you've been reading about red tide, it looks like the data now shows more clearly that runoff from surfaces like these, carry contaminants and pollutants that end up in our estuaries and our bayous and ultimately in the bay and the Gulf. So one of the things we've focused on from the beginning is not just conserving the 53 acres, which I'll talk about, for public land, and that means community land and a park, but transforming it environmentally, preserving the assets we have there that are natural assets and replacing the polluting man-made assets with much more resilient and much more ecologically responsible green space. The next 2 slides simply are different views of the conceptual 53-acre master plan that frankly was the result of, what did we calculate, Bill? 50,000 plus touches with people in the community over 2+ years. The next slide is the one I want to just talk through for a minute or two. From the beginning, I would say what's been accomplished so far, we've conserved 53 acres. All right, and that's important. It's hard to conserve and protect 53 acres in the real world that we all live in today. And the city, has approved that, and it will become part with that conceptual master plan as part of the city's comprehensive plan, and that's important. Second thing I touched on, we start with the water, and we start with the land, and we start with environmental restoration and preservation and enhancement. And Bill is a lot more expert than I am, although I'm committed, and he'd be happy to talk to you about. And I think we'll talk to you about some of those considerations that have driven design and plans so far. The next quotation is a lift from a presentation that we've used over and over again with city management, city commission, with community and public meetings, with investors. We just got an incredible gift from the Patterson Foundation, $2 million up front, $5 million in a challenge towards $20 million for capital for the first phase of the park. But what people respond to is, it's a signature public park for Sarasota, which doesn't have one really. It's open, accessible, free, and welcoming to everyone in our community. It's a gathering place where a community can come together and enjoy the widest range of health, fitness, recreational, arts, cultural, educational, whatever people want to do in their park. We try to understand the needs and wants of the community, and we try to translate that into design, plan, use, and activation. I simply listed I went back through, I'm a little bit of a consumer research geek, I will admit, but we actually, Bayfront 2020 saved every Post-it note from every meeting in the first 2 years, and I collected all the Post-it notes and I had them reproduced, and there are like 350 little nuggets of what you and your colleagues in the community, your neighbors in the community said you wanted in the early days in the park. We run surveys on a regular basis. We will be asking questions on Ask the Bay. We take your feedback and we try to sort through it. But when you look at things that sort of 2/3 to 80+% of the community said, yes, we want that in a park, these were the kinds of things they wanted. They want to be able to walk along the bayfront. They want piers they can go out over the water. They want us to enhance the natural habitat, and that includes the bayou and the mangroves. They want outdoor performance and recreation lawns and play areas, but they want just open space that they can sit and relax and read and talk with friends. They want some food and beverage. They want clean, safe restrooms, you know, and all of these kinds of things. And I added in this little piece on the beach because it was quite a spirited conversation at our first join-up meeting, and I don't have a personal opinion on beach or no beach, although Bill will explain the ecological basis for preserving a small one. But beach wasn't 60 to 75%, it was about a 35 to 40% interest in the community, but 509 community residents, you know, said, gee, we'd like to have a little beach that we can wade in down here in a public park for what it's worth. And then the last point is the most important one. We're continuously trying to balance with the city planning and development department, with the community, what's feasible, what's environmentally responsible, what can we afford, what will people really use. It's one thing that you say you'll use something, but we don't want to do a big capital project and then find out that it's not being used. So you'll see in phase one we're not building much building at all, because we don't want to take any expense or capital risk there. So without further ado, this is the current draft of the Bay Park Phase 1 design. Patrick was kind enough to share some of your questions, and Bill and I are prepared to engage in conversation and dialogue, and I just double-checked. We can be, I understand some of you have a board meeting at 3, is that right? Yeah. But if others of you want to stay, both of us
the board meeting's here.
Oh, your board,
yeah,
well,
this is
I guess you put us to the parking lot, but yeah. This is the first of several conversations, okay, that will happen. We'll be happy to come back, you know, at your request, if you can stand us a second time. You want to talk about the design a bit?
Sure. So I think those of you that have seen the previous approved master plan, and those of you that have been involved in initiatives like this know that a master plan is conceptual and at a very high level, call it 30 or 40,000 feet up in the air. And then what typically happens on a project like this is you zoom into your project by phases. In this case, our first phase is on the southern 9 or 10 acres or so. and you do a tighter analysis of the existing conditions and the existing environmental constraints and opportunities, and then you reflect that in an adjusted conceptual design, and then you prepare refined documents, and then ultimately construction documents, and you go build it. And so this is sort of that very first step in getting refined existing conditions and environmental conditions and adjusting the Phase 1 master plan to reflect the environmental conditions. This will continue to evolve a bit, and then we'll go through several stages of review, both in public neighborhood meetings as well as public workshops before the City Commission and the Planning Board. And so again, this is sort of the first step in that process of refinement. And probably there are a couple of things that you'll notice that have evolved from the master plan. Probably the most noticeable is arguably one of the most compelling features in the master plan, and that is the evolution of the pier. And so what we found, let me see if the mouse shows up on this screen. It does a little hard to see.
Can you zoom it up a little bit?
Sure. Well, let me see if it'll do that.
We'll know in a few seconds.
Yeah, it's not letting me do it. I might be able to escape out of it and zoom it. You know what? We're in PowerPoint, so it's not going to want me to do that. But
PowerPoint full screen zoom?
yeah, just a second.
While you're doing that,
Yeah.
you may want to comment on the nature preserve, because that looks like one, we got a grant. I forgot to mention that.
Yeah.
We're very thankful to the Bransick Foundation for giving us a sizable grant to begin with the shoreline, the bayou, and the mangrove area, and we've worked really closely with environmentalists and with the city, and it looks like we can get that permitted and maybe get it underway, right?
Yeah, this summer. I think that we can. Yeah.
Which would be great.
Yeah, so we're, as AG said, we're working on a mangrove trimming permit, which is regulated by the state, but it's a very clear process on what you can and can't do. And that will do a couple of things, but one of the main things that we think is important is that there is a fair amount of homeless activity in that mangrove area. And as we walk it, as some of you walk your dogs over there, you probably will see all sorts of remnants of that sort of activity. We have got a full-time person on site that's a full-time maintenance person the city has just assigned, and so hopefully some of that cleanup is occurring. But one of the things that we believe is important is to do some what is mostly called windowing, where you do a little bit of trimming. We aren't going to plant. We're not planning on topping the mangroves, but do a bit of windowing and a bit of trimming so that you can see in and out better. Because one of the best ways to mitigate for that sort of behavior that goes on is to improve visibility from a design standpoint. And so we think that will help. One of the best ways to improve that activity is just that park activity. Yeah, that's right. We had a similar challenge at Bradenton Riverwalk, and quite frankly, what solved that was building a great park that people came to, and that tends to have those sort of folks go to other places.
Bill, can I just add a
Yeah,
quick comment on
of
how
course.
about the mangrove walk? How many of you have taken the Bay Park mangrove walk?
Yeah.
The ones with the orange stakes. They've staked it off.
Yeah.
Yep, they've got orange stakes out there along, right along here, this area right here. So they're staking out where the walk's going to be out there. So you can begin to see some of your design concepts.
Exactly, and related to that, so a couple more things about it. That is the first pass at the design team taking this concept sketch and putting it on the existing base information with all the contours and all of that. And then a surveyor staked it, and last week, I believe it was last week, they were in town, and we walked it. And what we found, and what we always find, is at that first pass when you walk around the field, the site always informs you on things that you need to adjust. And so if any of you have walked it or do walk it, you'll see that there's some places where it doesn't really make any sense. And so we're making some adjustments. The other thing that we're doing that allows us to do is, I think, as you may have heard us say before, every drop of rain that falls on this 53 acres drains untreated into the bay, either through this bayou or straight into the bay. And so 30 acres of parking lot, every Starbucks cup, every drop of oil, everything drains straight into the bay. When we're done, every drop of rain will be pre-treated and cleaned before it goes into the bay. And so this will be our first step in doing that. And one of the things that we're doing where we've got the room is meandering the sidewalk and starting to create some depressions, shallow depressions, that will pre-treat and slow down some of that runoff before it goes out into the bayou and then ultimately into the bay. And so some of that you'll start to see. And again, if you walk that site and you see a flag that doesn't make sense, you're probably right, it doesn't make sense, and we're going to be making adjustments on it, based on what we saw. So the other thing that I wanted to point out that, I'm sorry I couldn't enlarge this easily, but so originally, I've got actually some blow-ups that I can hand out. I brought 4 of them, but we could hand that around. But originally we had, at a master plan level, shown, yeah, there you go, they're clipped together. Yeah, that's right, we'd shown 2 wider piers, one here and one here. And when we did the environmental survey, both the bathymetric survey, the mangrove survey, and the seagrass survey, what we found is that the piers substantially impacted the existing mangroves and substantially impacted the existing seagrass. While seagrass moves around, there's a stand of it, pretty good stand of it right here. And so what that led us to brainstorm and ultimately draw in refined form is taking the pier out, narrowing it, which you'll see if you get a chance to see some of these. The pier is actually narrower, but then goes out and around the seagrass and comes into an opening and crosses the bayou in this location. And so that allows us to not impact the mangroves and not impact the seagrass. And so because, of course, part of one of our guiding principles is to be environmentally sustainable. And so we want to encourage the growth of seagrass and mangrove and wildlife and all of that and not impact it. And so that is why this pier goes out and around. The other thing that you'll see is we had contemplated, this is the existing bridge, 2 bridges across to connect to the northern part of the site. You'll see that that was impactful of some of the mangrove, and that's why we went down to 1 bridge across the bayou. So we'll have ultimately 2 connections, but this will be our 1 connection to the north. And
Bill,
so,
you may
yeah,
want to, I'm just
please.
thinking, you may want to share the idea that one of our community members brought us about the oysters. I mean, this is just
Sure.
interesting, early stages.
Yeah. So, again, this idea of a living learning laboratory where we can provide an opportunity for our community and our community school children also to learn about the environment and to enhance the environment, to pre-treat the storm water, to improve the water quality, to improve wildlife and fish that are there. Some of the ideas that have come to us include utilizing, some of you may have seen that there's a program where volunteers harvest used oyster shells from restaurants, and they get dried out, and then they reseed them out in the bay to encourage the growth of more oysters. And so we had a doctor in the office last week, environmental scientist, who has created vertical oyster gardens, where he has volunteers that take those old oyster shells, drill holes in them, string them on rope or steel cable, and then hang them down in the water. And apparently there are millions of little oysters floating around the bay looking for a place to land and then grow. And so one of the ideas that he had is that we, on the pilings of this pier, hang some of these vertical oyster gardens to attract oysters, and then that will attract more life and more fish. One of the other ideas, some of you may have heard about the living shorelines that they're being tested in a couple places, one of them over by O'Leary's on the bayfront, where they take reef balls that have holes in them and stack them on shelves, and then that encourages some of the fish life to use them. And so one of the other ideas that we brainstormed with this doctor last week was getting these reef balls custom cast to go around a pier so they have holes in them, and so that will attract more fish, and so that will again sort of further that idea. And then the last piece that I'll share with you, one of the members of our board is Rod Hirschberger, who is also the chairman of PGT Windows, a very successful company here that ships windows all over the world. And so one of the ideas that we discussed was putting in some glass panels so that it allows light down through the pier to encourage the growth of seagrass, as well as the possibility to see some of the wildlife, some of the fish that are underneath. And so we asked Rod, do you think it's feasible to do some glass panels or planks that we can incorporate into the pier? And he said, Bill, we take laminated glass and shoot 2x4s at 200 miles an hour to make them resilient to hurricanes. Yes, we can make a panel that someone can walk on and look down underneath. And so there are all sorts, we're trying to incorporate all sorts of interesting ideas. Any that you might have, we'd love to hear about them, to make this an environmental living and learning laboratory and incorporate state-of-the-art environmental science into our design.
Bill,
couple more.
Maybe
Yeah,
you could speak
please.
to this. This spiral pier, great design. A lot of the concerns that were expressed had to do with congestion. One was closeness to the property line over here. Second was boat traffic, because the pier comes all the way out to about here, and boats here, and how would
Sure.
that interfere with their traffic there? So that, and then people coming off there, you don't want to send pedestrians down the sidewalk here where you have traffic exiting. I mean, we try and put the arm down to keep them stopping.
Sure.
But sometimes they're going in and out of there, same with most of you also. Minimizing the amount of people walking right in front of there.
Yeah,
So,
I think, so
address
Patrick, I think that's good feedback. A couple of things on that. One, we're not anticipating any transient day docks. No, so there'll be no, you can't pull your boat up and park it there for a couple hours. So we're not anticipating that. One of the things that we're looking at is the possibility to drop passengers off, or perhaps accommodate a water taxi. I don't know if you're aware, but the city is doing a water taxi feasibility study. And so they're looking at locations for that. Ultimately, certainly it makes sense for there to be a taxi stop at the north where the existing boat ramp is, but they're evaluating the feasibility here. And one of the things that we've got our consultant doing is looking at access from boats and how you all access your piers and how access might occur to this pier, and what the impacts could be. And so we'll have more detailed information on that. We've got a terrific consultant helping us with that, but we're certainly mindful of it. The other thing that I would mention is if you look at the master plan, you'll see we had two linear piers again that did this, and this pier actually curves around, and I would say argues or invites people to move into the park in sort of a more natural, organic way. The last difference related to the pier and the beach area that you'll see is the master plan. At the master plan, we didn't have the benefit of the final plans for the shoreline stabilization work that was just completed. This reflects that, and then what you probably have noticed, the existing beach, which naturally accretes there, and will continue to do that with the work that was done, is about half this size, but the slope on it is too steep, and so it's already starting to erode and wash out. And so one of the ideas here is to lay that slope back so that it's more naturally sustainable, and we don't have to go back and regularly re-rake and replant and do that sort of thing. So that's some of the thinking there.
How high is that pier? Does that kayakers go underneath?
Yeah, so we haven't, the question is how high is the pier? We haven't worked through exactly how high it is, but the idea is that kayakers and paddleboarders will have the ability to come out and under that. And so, again, we haven't worked through all of those details. Part of the desire is for folks to be able to get out and move along the shoreline in a paddleboard or kayak. And I have done that, and so, those of you that have done it know that low crossings are an issue that you have to work through. So we're thinking about that. The other thing is that people like to get over the water. We heard that a lot in our surveys, but they also like to get closer to the water. And so we're thinking about, are there some places on the pier, we start to imply it, where maybe on one side of it there are some places where the boardwalk steps down and you can get a little bit closer to the water. We don't envision this as a place where you come to the beach for the day and go swimming. That doesn't make any sense. You'd go to Lido or Siesta or whatever. It's really not that. It's really more getting folks access to the water. Perhaps we, once we've got, we deploy all of our strategies and it's teaming with seagrass and life, maybe it's a good place to take some children with snorkels and go out and learn about seagrass and learn about the environmental cycle. But we certainly don't see this as a swimming hole. But that idea, I experienced it when we worked on the Bradenton Riverwalk. We heard a lot, those of you that have been up there noticed that you walk along the water a lot, but there are not many places to get out over the water. And so that was a criticism we actually heard. We did renovate a fishing pier, but the ability for folks to get over the water and get down closer to the water is something that's, I think, sort of an innate human desire. So we're going to try and accommodate that, and you know, as we continue to get feedback on the design of the pier.
And Bill, does this replace the section that looked a little bit like that in the master plan that was further?
Well,
It
again,
seems like there's a similar looking thing on the other plan that's a little bit more.
I think it's the arc that.
Oh, the
goes-
arc.
That,
yeah,
it's actually, it's a very different, yeah.
yeah,
It's a
and
very different piece.
much larger to the north. Has anybody got the handouts that I gave?
Yeah.
I can have one of
You could
those.
just,
Go back to that.
there's the main one, that was
Yeah.
the original one.
Yeah, so I know it's a little bit hard to see, but in the master plan you can see here were the original piers, the overlook in a conceptual form, again high-level conceptual master plan, is further to the north, goes over the existing boat ramp, and is associated with the new Performing Arts Center. Again, much design to be done up there, and much you know, sort of environmental constraints work to be done. The other thing that I think was important to note in the original, this sort of the blow up, those are the couple copies that I handed out, and if anyone would like more copies, please let me know. I've got a card, or shoot me an email and I'll send them to you. But you'll notice that these two piers were wider, and so when we narrowed it and went out around the seagrass, it is bigger. But when you take into account the two bridges and the square footage of the pier, it's not that much bigger. And so, but it does respect the existing conditions and existing constraints.
This one is the original idea that the community was interested in was a sunset pier. Right?
What?
A sunset pier, right? So this one accomplishes that objectives and a lot of other objectives. The other, I don't know what we call it, that sweeping arc, is really not a pier. That's intended to be, I would call it an observation walkway that connects to all the other walkways. Connects to a new Performing Arts Center if that becomes a reality, and finishes up over the new boat ramp, which is up north. One comment on the boating, because you know, the Coast Guard has and will continue to weigh in, and we have an entire group in our implementation team that do nothing but waterfronts, including boating safety and navigation, all that other kind of stuff. The sort of original concept was to separate the boaters for good safety reasons. So the power boating into the public park would actually move even further north,
Right.
and it would be a new launch. So, you know, best current design, and what I would call manual or paddling would be down at the south end. And there were a whole bunch of good reasons for that. You know, not the least of was each would have its corridors, and they'd be separate, and more of the noise would be, you know, further from residents, and all that kind of stuff. But,
Yeah.
But then you always have things come up like if you want to test a water taxi, you know, in the short term.
Right.
I guess we do have an option. They could use the current boat launch, right? And people
Right.
would just walk down the walkway that I think many of us go on, that goes up past the Van Wezel, right, and curls
Right.
up. So I do think I think the thing that you have to understand is this plan will change again tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock because somebody will have a good idea and we'll
Good.
go, wow, that's a good idea, you know? Yeah, no, seriously.
Bill, let me,
Yes,
Yeah.
please.
let me stand up because I think I'd like to have a few words, and I'm sure that I represent the views of quite a few.
Yeah.
I'll be very candid with you. That spiral down the end is a monstrosity.
Okay.
It doesn't look pretty. It doesn't seem to achieve what you're talking about. And while I'm not an expert on the whole stack of the topics that you're talking about, it does not go anywhere close to making happen what you're talking about happening. The initial piers that you had coming out over there may have achieved some of the objectives. This spiral just cannot work. If you have a look, and if you go out there every day, as I do, all of the water that comes down brings in seaweed, brings in debris, makes a mess of what is commonly now referred to as the beach. There is no beach. There cannot be a beach. there cannot be people who are going to sit down over there, because any more than half a dozen people are not going to be able to sit there. How much of this has been prompted by a desire to accept the Patterson's money in a hurry?
None of it.
Zero.
At zero. Absolutely
Okay.
none of it.
Absolutely zero. The Patterson
What is-
gift
what
is
pushing this forward so quickly?
100% unrestricted. 100% unrestricted. It means it can be used for operating and or capital of any kind in the first phase. And they don't put their name on any capital.
Good.
I mean, that's just their policy. You can check it out on their.
So my
their
question
website.
would be, how have we gone from something which was attractive, something which is going to be very nice for the community, etc., to something which is now, as I used the word before, a monstrosity down at the bottom end. One that is going to create a lot of complications, which we haven't gone into yet, but a lot of complications, not just for us, but for people who are up and down Boulevard of the Arts, the homeless individuals who are now up and down, again, Boulevard of the Arts, and so on and so forth. How have we gone from this to this spiral?
Yeah.
Can you?
Yeah, sure. So again, appreciate your feedback. What I would share is it was largely driven by the environmental existing conditions, and also driven by feedback that we got from the public. And so we've gotten we continue to get every day a lot of feedback, and we've gotten the vast amount of feedback we've gotten has been very positive on this evolution. That's not to say that it's perfect. That's not to say that it won't evolve. That's not to say that we won't continue to do studies. As I said, we've just kicked off our boating consultant thinking about whether this makes sense for any powerboat use or not. Long term, certainly the powerboat area, as AG said, will be to the north when we do the work around the existing boat ramp, and this has always been envisioned as primarily human-powered craft. Short term, this is the first phase of our park, and so we have to think about that, and you have to think about when boaters come, because they will in their powerboats, what do you do with that? And so we don't have a perfect answer, but we're thinking about that.
Bill, just as,
So yeah, let's take other questions, please.
How do you plan to manage the congestion of traffic down Boulevard of the Arts? You've got people dropping off on a dead end. There's very little parking there. There's going to be drop-offs parking. I understand your plan is to have food trucks parked along the road and taken out the median. So that's an awful lot of extra congestion on a very small place.
Yeah. Okay. So great. So that's a good question. So a couple of thoughts. Let's take it in pieces. First, the existing parking spaces. There are about a little over 100 when you take into account the existing surface lot and the on-street parking on both sides. In our proposed design solution, we're suggesting about half that, so about 50 spaces or so, with the thinking being, every park that I've ever done, you always wrestle with safe and convenient access for cars while making it a great pedestrian and bike and family experience in the park. And so there's always that tension between getting close, getting parked, but causing interaction between humans and families and cars. And so our thinking is that we reduce the amount of parking along Boulevard of the Arts by about half. Again, it's about 50 spaces or so reduced. Recognizing that within a 5-minute walk, which is 1,200 feet, there are over 1,000 spaces. And so the first phase of this park, as AG has said, we want this to be an area where it's a living, learning laboratory. We're testing different things. One of the things that we want to test is how many folks will walk or bike into the park as opposed to drive. Again, knowing that there are over 1,000 spaces, so more than 10 times the spaces that exist today, within a 5-minute walk. What happens when we do that? Well, one thing that does is it means fewer cars will actually come down Boulevard of the Arts. So we expect there to be less vehicular congestion. Now, when you have less vehicular congestion, does that mean there are more people on foot? Does it mean there are more people on bikes? Potentially. And so that's one of the things that we'll evaluate and look at. But that is our thinking. In terms of the medians, we worked with the city and the city's consultant who's doing their transportation master plan and our transportation consultant, and they suggested that the existing medians create left turn challenges, particularly as you add some of the additional turning movements from the main street at the quay and the auteur. And so by removing that and making it a narrower cross section, that actually simplifies and makes that safer. What I will tell you, again, I'm a landscape architect and I have a degree in tree hugging from Texas A&M. So we are aspiring to relocate every large tree that is on our site and preserve it on the site. And so that there are several dozen that we're looking at doing that. But I've moved hundreds of trees in my 30 years of doing parks. It's very, very feasible. And shade is one of the things that we've heard over and over again, the importance of shade, particularly in the summertime. And so we're certainly going to put those trees to good use.
If I could just add one
Please.
thing. There is a large area planning study that the city has commissioned, which is going to try to get at what the quay's contribution to traffic's going to be, what's it going to be like with roundabouts in, how many parking places, Garage Street, and all of that are there in the area. And until they do an integrated study, we're looking at pieces and parts. But our intent is actually to reduce the motor vehicle traffic in this end, in the park end of Boulevard of the Arts. That's the intent. And if you look at successful parks in a lot of cities, we were both in Cincinnati. People said, well, where'd all the parking places? Well, we reduced the parking. We actually reduced the parking places adjacent to the park. People, if they drive in, they park 1, 2, 3, 4 blocks. It's not too far to walk. They're happy to walk it if they want to get to the park. And frankly, this whole area is going to be much denser from a residential standpoint, and all of those people will walk into the park. So I would say we ought, if we're concerned about vehicular traffic, much more of it's going to be driven by development, residential development and commercial development, than is going to be driven by the park. And we're trying to mitigate, some of that around the park.
Yes, sir. Let me keep going, folks that haven't asked questions. Yes, sir.
First of all, I think if you ask the residents here, the Bocel residents, about coming down Boulevard of the Arts, you are going to destroy the character that exists today. It's a huge issue to us that you come in here and you take the road from having a median with beautiful trees, doing away with it, and I don't care how you replant the trees, the character of that is going to be gone. So that's really important. Is there a way to do it? And we've had discussions about the people that designed this. They don't live here, and they don't see the vehicular traffic that exists today. A lot of us are very concerned about, you can't get semi-trucks in here very well, and we have moving trucks that come here that right now have to park in certain areas because of the way the road is, and they have to turn around. And to have that pier, kind of what looks like dumping out onto the dead end of that street and what have you, I think needs to be rethought. I really think some creative juices need to be put into it in terms of another solution that would work and still keep the character that exists.
Okay, so appreciate your feedback. Couple thoughts. One, in terms of who is driving the design, we're driving the design and the community's driving the design. The consultant responds to what our direction is. I work here every day, AG works here every day. I drive and walk this several times a day. And so I don't want you to feel like that a consultant in Boston or some other city is designing our park. Our community and the feedback we're getting is driving the direction we ask our consultants to prepare. The other thing I'll share with you is that the architect of record and the engineer of record and the landscape architect of record are based in Sarasota, and they're sub-consultants to the Sasaki team. So you've got a local team and a local client that is largely driving this. The other thing that I will share with you, we have heard from several, including the city, the concern about the ability to turn around a semi, a fire truck, and so this area at the end is under review, and they're using the auto-turn software that is standard in the industry to make sure that that movement can be accommodated. And so you will see some adjustments at the end to make sure that we accommodate those sorts of truck movements, because we recognize that's the only in and out for not only residents but any moving trucks and that sort of thing. Yes, ma'am.
Is the lighting component of the project within your responsibility, or is that someone else? And also, second part of that question, I guess,
Let me ask that, and if you think of it, or answer that, and if you think of it, please ask. So the lighting is, now it's a city street, and so the city will obviously have influence on it, just like everything that they do, but that we do. But we're aspiring to meet dark sky standards, and so one of the things that I notice is that some of the existing lighting, where it exists, does not even come close to meeting dark sky standards. And so what I think you'll see as we develop the park in phases is a much higher quality, much more efficient, full cutoff, safer, less glare sort of a lighting system, which will make it safer and also meet dark sky standards.
And then, but as a public park, does Florida have a closing time for the parks to close?
Okay, yes sir, we'll get to you in a second.
I can answer that. The
Park hours.
yeah, the city has. So I'm probably the only person in the room that has read the entire city policy and details park by park for the city of Sarasota. But the long and short answer is there are curfews. Okay, there are different curfews in different parks for some odd reason. I'm not exactly sure why. But they're generally 9:30, 10, and I think the latest one is like 10:30 or 11. You know, in my experience in Cincinnati and other cities, you really don't want the curfew to go past, I mean, you want a curfew at 10 or earlier, right? Depending. Sometimes curfews move by season, depending on when it gets dark, okay? You know, I do think, I just wanted to say that I think the character is a very important point, and I think the design options that will be explored are, you know, right now the character is driven by the palms that go down the center median. If you have palms going down both sides, and if you have a wider green piece, you know, what does that, you know, you have to look at that character too, right? You also, so I think that I get the character piece, and there are people thinking about the character piece. The other thing that people are thinking about is the city would like to have a more connected and consistent Boulevard of the Arts as they stretch out of our little neighborhood here up into the Rosemary District. So there are people in the city development and planning department, design people, you know, trying to think about that too. So I do think, you know, keep the comment and question prominent on the agenda, and just, you know, let's look for, I always like to try to find a third way. It's not just, you know, A or B, maybe we can find a C that's even better, you know, than A or B. I'm not saying there is one, I'm just saying that, you know, keep character issues alive. Traffic, there are so many dimensions to traffic, it's complex, and that's why they're trying to do a traffic study, and that's why, you know, we are going to have a roundabout eventually here at Boulevard of the Arts, because we'll be the only ones without a roundabout, and I know we're all learning how to drive through roundabouts. And by the way, we are not responsible for the roundabouts, we are not responsible for the traffic. We do not program the traffic lights. We are citizens who work through it, you know, just like you do. And then there was another question that just
Oh, on the
came up
phone.
here. Yes.
Question on the phone?
Could you please repeat your question so we can repeat it for the group here?
I think they were just asking to rephrase the question from the audience so they could hear the question.
Okay, perfect.
Yes,
Yeah,
ma'am.
I think the elephant in the room too is the food trucks.
No decision made.
There's, you know, you're talking about putting food trucks up Boulevard. Now, first off, Boulevard, in my estimation, means that there's a boulevard or a tree
Yeah.
grow in the center of the road. So it will no longer be Boulevard of the Arts. It will be called the Arts.
I think, yeah, Boulevard of the Trucks, of the food trucks. You know, first of all, you know, I know we've shown some conceptual designs that have food trucks there. As I told Patrick yesterday, absolutely no decisions have been made on that front. We have started to sit down with the city and people who do this for a living, but we have to think through all of the operational side of this, which is just beginning. Where is the gas line? Where is the electric power? Where is the water going to be? How does that relate to the water treatment area? Where are the restrooms going to be? So I think we could, I think there's very high probability that we will not end up with, you know, food trucks 365 days a year sitting out here, okay? But all of that, you know, we will look through. One thing about this site right now, we have plenty of surface parking lot. Okay, so, yeah, no, I mean, so there are all kinds of things we can try. Now, it doesn't mean that there won't ever be a food truck there, don't know. But I'm just trying to say no decision has been made, and there's a lot of work to do before we know where food trucks are going to be. I also want to, because last night I went through every one of the 12 questions. There is no restaurant planned, just so you understand. There's no fixed restaurant. There certainly is no fixed restaurant with 160 seats in it. In fact, we've made a decision so far to not build any permanent, you know, expensive structures for food and beverage. We're talking about, you know, concession roofs and maybe sidings and places that are shaded so people can sit. And we're talking about, you know, frankly, bringing it in and taking it out in the beginning instead of investing in that. If you recall, the original conceptual master plan envisions a canal area, you know, up by where a new performing arts center. In that area, we did envision some restaurants, okay? But again, you know, that could be phase 3, 4, 5. That could be 7, 8, 10 years from now, okay?
Yeah, phase one.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so just two things. One
Yeah.
is there a possibility to move the beach further north? Because away from
Yeah.
these existing buildings. I mean, obviously, we recently purchased.
Yeah.
We purchased because of the privacy, because of the quiet. And just the other day, there was a boat out there and they were partying, whatever. I have no problem. And I think the park is great,
Yeah.
but the noise is horrible. It
Yeah.
travels across water like at lightning speed.
Yeah.
So if it's possible to move the beach north, it would be a lot of help, number one. And
Yeah.
number two, when you're dealing with development and future plans and whatnot, you know, there's green space
Yeah.
now, but what's gonna stop the push to make that green space parking lots? You know, the large.
Okay.
Unless, I mean, you can guarantee that those won't become parking lots. I mean, I just need to know because we're ready to put some money into our place and it'll be good if this happens.
Okay, let me try the second one first. You know, I would say that, you know, I'm just going to be like totally straight up with you. We have been fighting parking. Bill and I could make a living fighting what I would call the push for excessive parking. Okay, so I think we have, and Patrick and I have talked about this, we have to be very, very careful to understand we're talking about a public park here, and most public parks people walk into. They walk into, right? And this is not so huge that it takes you a half an hour to walk into the park. You can, for those of us who walk this regularly, you can walk all the way around the park in somewhere between 10 or 15 minutes. So we are encouraging walking, okay? Second point is, it's a, you know, if we're going to deliver on conserving a public place for the community, and if it's going to be environmentally responsible, it's going to be mostly green and blue. So I think we are in a continuous battle against buildings, parking garage and parking lots, and all I can say is Bill and I are on side there. We can't guarantee, okay, somebody won't want some parking to support a performing arts center down the road, okay? On the other hand, we can tell you that we will be fighting for a solution that does not intrude on the park.
Could you maybe move the beach, though?
Well, I do have a comment, and I'm going to ask Bill because he's far more expert. That beach location is strictly driven by the ecology, and we have a photo of that site from 1935 when the only thing on. So, I mean, we're not digging a new beach. We're simply trying to protect
it just looks like
small area.
Huge. It's huge. It's being very much so enlarged.
It's not intended. I think our diagram is has appropriately brought home to us that we've scared people that this is going to be.
Yeah, see, there's the beach. Go back, Bill.
Yeah,
beach on the north side.
It's too big.
It's too big.
Yeah, so
I get it. I get that.
But the existing beach and the beach that's, again, this is at several places that naturally accrete beach. And the work that was just done will continue to build on the naturally accreted beach. Again, we've got photos from the 30s where there's a much substantially wider beach. This is simply an attempt to lay the slope down which will naturally make it bigger, but make it gentler. Because again, the work they just finished 2 weeks ago is already eroding and washing down into the bay. And so that doesn't make any sense. What does that mean? It means the slope is too steep. So you lay it down, which means it goes back further. But as we said before, this is not a place for going to the beach for the day or beach volleyball tournaments or any of that.
Okay, because it looks like that. And I don't mean to be a pain, I'm leaving. You
It's
guys-
fine.
No, it's very fair.
Yeah, and I don't mean to be a pain.
No,
because
no.
I'm sure people would think the same
We,
thing.
we want school kids, you know, are we interested in having school kids go into a nature preserve and actually
Right.
get an education there like they do
That'd
at
be
the
awesome.
orchestra? Yeah, that we're
Right.
interested in, right?
Right.
So in a funny way, you know, the monstrosity is sort of designed to enable people to walk there in the normal course
Right.
of the day and the week. It's not intended to be, you know, an alternative to Lido or
Right.
Siesta.
Okay, well, key term, conserving. You're supposed to conserve, please
We are,
conserve what
I got
you have
conserved.
to.
That's the first.
Okay?
Right.
No, I
Conserve
understand.
what we have too.
Thank
I
you.
understand.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
So this might be interesting for me, probably one of the youngest people in here, but you have a community that has, you know, medical issues. So when you're talking about walking and accessibility, really, people are going to need it to be closer, you know, because your older community, you want them to come to the park, but they're not going to want to be 5, 6 spaces away. They need something that's going to be closer. They need to be dropped off a little closer. So I don't know, you know, I'm not sure you're around, my parents' place. But I'm just thinking something that maybe drives the traffic or the interest further out that allows people to kind of have somewhere that they eat and walk around, and then if they really want an extensive walk, come further down. But otherwise, you are going to have that congestion just simply because people, they can't walk 10 blocks.
Yeah.
That's just realistic.
No, that's really good feedback. We are going to have, we are studying and going to have plenty of pickup drop-off space, places on the site somewhere for Uber and Lyft drop-off, for the gotcha vehicle to drop folks off. Again, and we will have some, obviously, handicap spaces for folks that today who are disabled have come to said, hey, we come watch the sunset, and the only way I can get there is to drive to the shoreline and watch it. And so we're going to have places for that because that's the right thing to do. We've got several on our team that are accessibility experts that are helping us think about that, and more than just vehicular accessibility, but accessibility to everything on the site that is as boundary free as possible. And so we are thinking about that. But again, it's always a balance in a park to balance mobility, access, park experience, all ages, all of that sort of thing. But we are wrestling with that and will continue to. Yes, I want to catch people that haven't had a chance to ask a question, and I think Patrick's going to kick us out in 2 or 3 minutes, right?
It's up to Kim now.
We have
We're on your time.
discretion on what time we start the board meeting, so I have no problem with it, as long as you folks are comfortable
Okay.
in answering questions.
Okay, yes, ma'am.
We can
Me?
continue.
Yes, please.
I'm looking at you here.
Okay.
Yes, sir. We'll come to you next.
You'll be next.
I have a couple
I'll
of
let you know.
questions about the idea of the spiral pier, which actually looks lovely to people that don't live here. How high off the ground is that pier?
Again, the gentleman asked the question. We don't know yet. We'll be balancing trying to get close to the water with the ability in some places to get paddleboards and kayaks underneath. And so we don't know yet, but stay
We really
tuned
don't
for
want
that.
people looking in our windows as they walk around the pier.
Well, I don't know what your finished floor is, but it's not going to be nearly that high. It's going to be down pretty close to the
The other
water.
thing is, why couldn't you build that pier up the other way? Why does it circle back this way? Why doesn't it circle up and maybe go down toward the Van Wezel?
Well,
I mean, while you're at it, if you're doing it, then you're...
well, again, this
Then
is
they can
not
walk back across the bridge if they really want to go for that walk.
sure. So this is outside of our phase. Phase 1
Oh.
is this
Well, then
location.
Why don't you
The
wait
van-
and then do it when you
It's
get to
kind of
that
artificial
phase?
constraint.
Well, again, I appreciate your feedback. The phase 1 that we have is this 9 or 10 acres on the south end.
Okay, well, we
So that's
hate
the phase.
that, so what, we think you should wait and do it right, rather than just jerryman, jerry-rig it and jam it.
All right, thank you for your input. We got a question on the phone.
Go ahead, question on the phone, go ahead.
Thank you. Besides imagining an environmental classroom, you're also hoping to attract more voters, to have special events, to host sunset watching, to have food trucks at times, etc. My question is, who's going to have jurisdiction and the money and the manpower to manage, if it's needed, the traffic and the parking and the activities? Who's going to be responsible for keeping it nicely maintained, for picking up the trash that will be left? Will alcohol be allowed? Are there noise restrictions? Thank you for answering already a question on curfew. Who's going to manage the special events? Will there be money and manpower for that, or everything will be in place and let it run itself? How's that going to work?
Okay. According to the...
Is this a city responsibility?
It's a joint city and conservancy responsibility, and actually it's a joint city, conservancy, and performing arts center responsibility, which is sort of, today it's a joint Van Wezel and city responsibility. So the Van Wezel programs their lawn, and they program their event venue, right? And they coordinate with the city for some cleanup and for some security. But most of the rest of it is provided for by the Van Wezel. But, you know, in the future, it will be, the Conservancy will be staffed and funded to manage the part of the park that it will be managing. So there will be some outdoor activities that it will manage. The Performing Arts Center will be staffed and capable and funded to manage their space, which includes, in the conceptual master plan, outdoor adjacent performing lawns. And the city ultimately owns the land, ultimately is responsible for basic maintenance in the contract, basic security in the contract. And in terms of, without going into all the policies, I mean, honestly, we hope it'll be cleaner than it is today. It'll be better manicured and maintained than it is today. It'll be safer than it is today. So, you know, that's the intent. The intent is all of the very important, daily, weekly, monthly, annual use by park goers, that issues that you raise, you know, the intent is, frankly, it'll be better funded, it'll be better staffed, and it'll be better operated. But we won't know anything until I always say this, we won't know anything until sometime in 2021, when the first 8 to 10 acres is completed and the Conservancy and the city together start to operate that park. I think one thing you do not need to be concerned about is the Rolling Stones will not be here every Saturday night. Too bad. Sorry, but if you want to listen to the Rolling Stones, you're going to have to do it in the privacy of your residence. Having said that, the city does provide for, in civic spaces, and the number I think is 3 or 4 right now, but for a certain number of city-approved, community usually suggested and well attended by the community events in civic spaces, like parades on Main Street. So it's not unusual in city parks across America for, over time, you know, events to occur in the park. I have no idea what those events are going to be. We're going to listen to the community, and if the community is interested in trying something, we'll probably experiment with something small in the beginning and see whether it's something that the community is interested in. But all of that, you know, all of that has to be provided for, or the park is a failure. I guess the last thing I would say, and this is the reality of Sarasota, parks are underfunded in Sarasota. They've been underfunded since before the recession and financial crisis. You can go through the city budget, they can't even keep the restrooms open. In most of the parks, they can't keep them cleaned, they can't keep them mowed. In very few have they made many improvements. God bless Doc Worland for, you know, making a private donation and I think doing some good things with this little park under the bridge. But that's sort of the, if you step way back, what's the attempt here? The attempt here is to create a partnership between the community, to provide what the community wants, and to provide resources through the Conservancy that the city, for whatever reason, you know, doesn't have. And some of those resources are people, you know, like Bill and Sasaki and a whole bunch of local and others who are helping us, some as volunteers, and it's money. I mean, I hate to say it, you know, philanthropy is going to, and you know, if we pull this off, philanthropy is going to probably pay for 75 or 80% of this first phase. You know, the city will contribute. Yeah.
I have a follow-up question.
Please.
I appreciate your efforts at design and community involvement and your goals, but the reality is that since we know that funding is tight, I think it's unrealistic to make a design hoping that philanthropy will take care of the very real consequences to that design. I take no issue with it. I think it's a wonderful idea. But I'm also picturing litter baskets that aren't open and noise levels and the necessary things that happen when people get together in a public space. And I'm not saying that anybody would be using it inappropriately. It's just what happens. And I'm suggesting that the design in a vacuum without a real commitment from the city or the Conservancy for funding to take care of the consequences of that design, I think that's essential, and it should be considered at the time that the design is being developed. Not as you, I think if I understood you, you said 8 to 10 acres would be developed and then people would talk about maintenance.
No.
Just as a second point, I don't see that the Van Wezel enterprise is remotely going to get involved with any kind of cleanup or maintenance efforts for the improvements near Condo on the Bay. Why would they?
Okay, they won't on the second, but they will be very much involved in adjacent performance lawn like the lawn they have right now. The lawn that's south of the Van Wezel, city-owned property, but the Van Wezel furnishes it. They program it. They provide for setup and takedown. They ensure that it's clean before and clean after, and the litter's picked up and all of that. Hey, on the first part, I hope I didn't, you know, I hope that we didn't have a misunderstanding. First of all, no park gets built until we have the money. You know, no park gets built until we have the money. That's the deal that we have with the community and with the city. And as part of that, we're telling both the city, okay, the county, the state, whom we've made application for grants, and others. There are environmental grants and recreational grants out there that we'll be applying for, and private and philanthropic investors, that we're setting aside some percentage. You know, right now the bogey's 20% of every dollar that we get, and that is for operations and maintenance, because we totally agree with you. We know you can't build a capital project and not provide for the maintenance and operations side, and based on our studies of 40 plus other parks, that's about the range of what it takes. So the only point I was trying to make is there is no operation and maintenance until we have some park, and we're not going to have any park until 2021 at the earliest. So I think we're in violent agreement on that. And by the way, there will be litter, but it will have to be cleaned up. Every restroom won't be perfectly clean after someone uses it. They have to be cleaned on a regular basis. But I guarantee you our restrooms will be a lot better than the restrooms that are currently on the site. I'll invite you to use ours.
Yes, sir.
Which ones are those?
They're not there yet.
Not there yet. Yes, sir.
I just have two thoughts that
Sure.
I haven't heard expressed yet, but the first one is, I do think the entirety of Boulevard of the Arts, both sides of 41, would place more value on the future bridge
Oh, the overpass?
than
Yeah.
the spiral
Amen.
here. And so I don't know if there's any way that you are, if that's part of your work, or if you can more heavily influence that, but that to me would be a much higher priority for what gets built first
Okay.
to take advantage of the park.
Okay.
The other thing is, I didn't hear you talk about at all traffic coming in to that kayak launch, let's say. I mean, I know on
Sure.
any given day, there's 50 or so kayakers, paddleboards, and jet skis that would be, if there were food trucks there, or if there was a park to see, there'd be inbound traffic. And so I don't know how you're gonna handle them at that kayak launch. Have you thought about,
Good point.
Yes.
50 a day?
We have. Yeah. So it's-
Spaces for people coming in, not just the folks that are wanting to get out.
Yeah, two good questions. So the first one, the overpass. That overpass is anticipated to be funded by FDOT, so that's the state. And so what we're thinking is that the way you get funding for roundabouts and overpass, anything in the public right-of-way like that, is you get in the 5th year of the 5-year MPO and then FDOT plan. And we will be working to do that. The roundabout is currently in the 5th year of the MPO plan, so that's for construction money. And behind it, we'll be working on trying to get the overpass in that same 5th year of the 5-year plan. So again, there's substantial money available, taxes that we pay, gas taxes, that will pay for these transportation improvements. And so that's the thinking. So that's why that can't be in the first phase. We are big supporters of that connectivity across 41 in multiple locations, and we're going to continue to work on that. The other question about the kayak paddleboard launch, I'm an avid paddleboarder. The idea is that we have a number of spaces there that would include some ability to drop off and unload, and a place to do that, to pull up temporarily for 5 minutes, unload your paddleboard or kayaks, and then go park. Again, within a 5-minute walk, you've got over 1,000 spaces today. And so that's how that would work. We'll have to manage it for sure. We're not sure exactly how many people want to use that. I don't know, ultimately, do we have somebody down there that's attending it during heavy use times? Potentially. That's some of the things that we're going to evaluate. But we are thinking about how we can encourage that use. But we don't currently envision trucks with 100 kayaks coming and dumping it off at this location and people launching from there. I think there are other places where that would occur.
Again, I was more thinking about the inbound traffic from the folks that are out on the
Yeah,
bay,
yeah.
wherever
Oh,
they-
I see. People that are
I
on
understand.
I got it. On a paddleboard.
Yes, paddleboards, coming from the Hyatt and the Ritz
Yeah,
on their
right.
little paddleboards.
Yeah, yeah.
and
Right.
kayaks.
Especially jet skis, there's one you might think.
Well, I don't think, honestly, I hope we don't have jet skis there.
Yeah, we're
because
going
I
to
think
restrict that.
That would be a safety issue.
Yeah.
So I don't think we should have them, and I think it's, we're going to build a certain capacity, and if we need more, we're going to have an option to build more. You can help us a lot on the overpass,
Yeah.
okay? Because there is an ongoing and long-standing discussion between traffic experts. I am not one. I am just a pedestrian and a citizen, about whether it's better to cross at road level or whether it's better to cross over road level. And so there are some who believe these traffic lights, like the one tested between,
At first.
you know the one I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Okay, and I've used it as a pedestrian, I've gone through it as a bicyclist, and I've gone through it in my car. And there are some who believe that is a solution. There are others, us included, and our team, who believe that the overpass is something that we should definitely test, and that at least at 10th Street and Boulevard of the Arch, it makes all kinds of sense, and we've even shared designs, okay? So you can help us, sincerely help us, by expressing your preference or your point of view with city management and city commission. Yes, sir.
I have a comment on that, and then a couple other small
Sure,
comments. And that is, what about wheelchairs? You have a problem because legally, because you have to provide for them
We
a
will.
mechanical ramp, and to make the ramp so long. Now, the other part of my comment is this: would you please from now on show the true building down here? I don't know what these things are. They look like they're shadows of the actual buildings, but they're way back here. If you would please put all of our buildings here, where they belong, because this looks beautiful, but you don't see how close they are to all our residences. So if you put that up, you'll also notice that right here, where this is going to be, you have the boulevard, which now it's almost there. I mean, the ground plan is right there. So put where that is, because it is no setback whatsoever. So to have this come over, rather than the city fathers allowing, and mothers, allowing for setbacks in the future, do something like that. We're blocked by the developers, just, you know, it's not the developers, it's really the city. It's
Allowing
the
the
city. Just having, yeah, not redoing this. So that thing, I think, would be very helpful, because everybody looks at this, they heard that this got a standing ovation. Well, yeah, because everything looks beautiful, but no. Buildings are coming right up to this, and this is not going to be like this, because they're going to have to be this way. So this is not realistic. If you get a little more realistic now, and by the way, you guys have done great work, and you know, it's commendation, and we were at, a lot of us were at the meetings at the very beginning. The other comment, which is a big one, if you can see the other one, the overall plan, what I think happened, or it seems to us, I think to me anyway, what happened is that you know you're not going to get the money for years for this. So what you've done is say, okay, let's do this. Now the problem is when this is done, all these people are going to spread out, and a lot of them are going, this is the larger space, so this will absorb most of the people. In the next 5 or 10 years, everybody's going to be down here. So this is going to be like a funnel. And people are going to funnel down into this area, and we are going to have such an impact that we're going to go crazy, those of us who live here, and you too.
You're not gonna get out.
Let me. I think the second one wasn't a question. I think it was a comment, which we appreciate. The first one.
Well, the comment is, how are you going to do that?
Yeah, well, I think the first one was a question. So the first one I think was a question related to the overpass, and we actually have studied it. Again, I worked for a transportation firm for 31 years, and so while I'm not one, I've been around them, and we've done studies, and overpasses easily fit that meet ADA. So it may not seem like it, but one of the interesting things about Boulevard of the Arts is you've got a 10-foot rise up to Coconut, one block. And so if you're walking at that intersection and you keep walking level, you almost are high enough to cross right over. And so actually, and then once you get onto our site, we've got 53 acres to transition you down. And so actually, the ADA part is easiest at this Boulevard of the Arts overpass. But it's a little narrow, but we still got about 60 feet to actually accommodate that.
Bill, one thing about the overpass is where do you envision the people parking that are going to use the overpass? Our understanding of what's available in Rosemary, it's pretty limited, so you've got this huge cost to get it over the street, but where are the people going to park to be able to walk over?
So the idea on the overpasses is we heard a lot from our community connecting this park to the neighborhoods in the downtown and just north of downtown area, Rosemary, Central Coconut, Gillespie Park. And so that's why we showed 3 overpasses. And then we've also done some very preliminary studies on what we could do to improve the connectivity on 10th and Boulevard of the Arts to our site. So bike lanes, wider sidewalks, better lighting. But the idea is that people walk and bike because it's actually not that far a walk. The challenge is getting across State Highway 41. That's obviously the problem. And so that's the idea of the overpasses. But we're envisioning that mostly for walking and bicycling. We're having some discussions with Mark Lyons at the city about the possibility of one or several of them being wide enough to accommodate that 4-foot wide gotcha vehicle, so that you might have the circulator that could go up over it and not have to enter the roundabout, which would reduce congestion on 41. And so again, we're in the early stages, and I told you the sort of the cycle on funding, but very good feedback on the overpasses. Yes, ma'am.
What is the size of what is the size of that arc that's going to go out with the beach? Because it looks so much like such a monstrosity. It looks bigger than the Van Wezel, and it's probably, is that proportion correct?
No.
On the arch.
I mean, the little red dots make it look like this.
No, the other round.
Yeah, so the other one. So I'll go to that in a second. But again, when you look at the scales are different. When you look at the scale of these 2 piers and these 2 bridges, and you compare it with the scale of the narrower one that goes around the seagrass and is one bridge, they're not that much square foot difference.
It looks enormous.
But well, it does, because that's a blow up of that 10 acres, and this is a 300 scale drawing of the entire 53 acres. So that is a bit deceptive. Again, I handed out a few, I only brought a few of those 2 that are at the same scale, but I think you'll see the square footage is actually not that different, but it responds to the environment better. Anybody that hasn't had a chance to ask a question that wants to ask a question?
Yes.
Yes, sir, please.
at the end of Boulevard of the Arts, can there be some kind of a barricade between the circular pier coming in so people aren't walking directly onto Boulevard of the Arts?
Yeah, I think that's...
Where cars are pulling out, like something, a barricade that would route them at least to the north side of Boulevard of the Arts, to the sidewalk or...
Yeah, I think that's a terrific point, and we've heard that a couple times today and several times prior to today. And so again, we've got our consultant using software to evaluate the turning movements of fire trucks and moving vans and that sort of thing. And then we will absolutely be designing this in a way that makes it as safe an environment as possible. Again, the old pier directed people in a straight line down Boulevard of the Arts. This pier directs people more into the green space area in the main part of the park. But this is still conceptual. We're zooming in. We've got to get a lot tighter, and we have to work out a lot of those details once we understand the constraints and the vehicular and pedestrian movements and all of that. And we will do that. That's a part of designing and implementing a great park.
Is that set in concrete, in other words?
No.
No, it is evolving. We're meeting with groups like this and meeting with the city. And we do them almost every day and get feedback and are incorporating that, and we'll be refining this as we move forward.
Donna's point really was quite valid. You can actually turn that thing upwards. It really makes such a difference. And you still have got people, you see, who love to take photographs in the afternoon with the sunset in the background. Will not be able to do that because anybody trying to take a picture is going to have this pier behind you. If, on the other hand, it's spiraled upwards, then you could still have those photographs taken with a beautiful sunset and water behind you.
Again, thank you for sharing. Yes, sir.
It looks like people are starting
One or two more, and then it sounds like we're
Just
needing
a couple more questions, and then we're going to.
Yes, sir. And then you, sir. Yes, sir, in the back, and then you, sir. Please, yes, sir, with the hat. Yes.
We fought very heavily to get the MERT, which is the multi-use recreation.
Absolutely.
That was proposed in the previous ownership of the Quay to come through the main fruitful exit.
Yes, sir.
Come through the plan and then exit in El Bernona. This new plan, which was approved by the planning association in the city, totally disregarded the old plan. There was an attorney that said, well, this is what the old plan was, which was completely false. And now we have it going up 41 on the worst stretch of roadway, and it ends at that corner. Where's it supposed to go with your plan?
Right. So, great comment about the MERT. I'll just share with you that I've been working with the city. I agree with your comments about that not being the ideal place for it to come from the south. Unfortunately, that's just sharing my opinion. We don't have any impact on what happens across from us. But the primary MERT will come along 41. There will be a secondary path that you can come through that's really their main street that I think you'll see some people using. And then there's some discussion of coming up through the alley too. But I think the two main access points.
A MERT.
Yeah, no, I know.
No, a MERT has requirements.
Of course.
By FDOT, AASHTO,
right.
And APA.
We agree.
It has to be 10 feet wide.
Minimum.
And then you have obstructions, you have velocity, you have speeds.
Totally agree.
Totally.
Yeah. So again, I appreciate your comments on the quay out of our control, but what is in our control is how we safely connect to these two access points at the quay, get them across Boulevard of the Arts, and then into our site. And so we're studying that. We don't have the answer yet.
The
But
only thing is El Bernona is going to congest our access and egress and ingress to Boulevard of the Arts because there is not a turn lane from 41 into their property. The roundabout at Fruitville Road is going to be a disaster because you have solid traffic in one lane coming as far back as 17th Street
yeah.
And during peak during the day, beach time, okay, you won't be able to get even out of it.
Yeah.
Okay? So, I've dealt with this. We've been full-time residents for 30 years.
Yes.
I've been involved in all of this totally.
Yeah.
And you're looking for the same people, just before the paraphrase of what they're supposed to do, and maintain this and maintain this. you're looking at the same people who can't do that job now, doing more of it later on. And when you talked about the budget, I said, have you looked at the unfunded pension liability of this city? Have you looked at the $2 million lawsuit that they lost with no insurance coverage in the past 6 months?
So again, appreciate your feedback. The one thing we can control that we agree on is that we need to and will connect to the multi-use recreational trail as it comes onto our site. And we'll have at least a mile, if not multiple miles of it on our 53 acres. And then we're also going to work to get it connected further to the north and ultimately up to Whitaker Gateway Park. And so we're very sensitive to bicyclists and pedestrians getting into the site safely and moving about safely. That's part of what makes a great park. And so we are going to work on that. Yes, sir.
I'd like to make a comment rather than a question. My wife and I lived here for 18 years. Before I retired, I've worked for 45 years in both process management and in project management. Two very different things. I'd just like to commend the Conservancy and part of the Conservancy for being able to do both. To not only projects start and projects finish, processes start and never finish. Because they're constantly modified. And process management is the hardest thing you can ever do in business because it's not interesting, it's boring. Project management has a finite product at the end of it. So I really would like to say on behalf of at least several owners we're friends with, what a refreshing change it is to actually meet other people, other owners, professionals like yourself who understand the difference between process management and project management and can influence people like the city, people like the FDOT, people who have really no interest in the community, in my opinion, to do the right thing for the residents and owners around this area in particular now, but in other areas of the city. So, from our perspective, I'd just like to say thank you.
Thank you very much for saying that. Thank you. I think that's and one commitment you have from us too is we will continue to do that. AG and I and our team and our consultant are working very hard at that. And it's not always perfect and it's not always pretty, but we're going to continue to work hard at that. So thank you for your comments.
Yeah, just thank you so much. And this conversation will continue. It's part of the process. I took a lot of notes. Bill didn't have time, but we mean what we say. If there's something you want to follow up, you know how to reach us. You can either go on to Ask the Bay and ask the question directly. We'll get back to you. Or you can send it to either of our emails, okay? And we'll be back. I do want to just say one last thing, and I know I'm now into your board meeting. Every city, including our own, has budget problems, and the ones that were mentioned are real ones. The whole reason we fought so hard to create a long-term partnership and create a not-for-profit conservancy is so that we wouldn't be dependent on the city's budget. That does not mean we are not asking the city to contribute. Okay, and in fact, in the current budget cycles coming up, they're putting $1 million in for the next 2 years. It's not approved, it'll get voted on in September, but it's proposed. $1 million each year of capital towards the first phase of the park, which is going to cost 20 to 25 million. So you say, wow, that's only 10% or so, but that's a beginning. They also have provided, what did we figure out?
420,000 or something.
Yeah, 400,000+ so far in improvements and maintenance to the site and preparation. So the city has a small commitment. The last thing I would say, they did create a Parks and Recreation District for the first time. It will have a budget in the next cycle for the first time. And we have requested for the first time that this park be one of the recipients of some of that budget.
That does not involve a tax increase for any of us. It is simply a reallocation of the millage that we already pay. So my main point is, yeah, we're going to have to raise money from a lot of grant sources. We're going to have to raise money from the private sector, whether it's business, private, philanthropic, private, whatever. But I don't think it's impossible, because I've seen it happen several times before in several other places. And if you check go on the internet and check the Trust for Public Land, you'll see in 40 to 50 cities across America, these kinds of conservancies have been created, and they have had some amount of success. So we're not following a model. We're not trying to do something that's never been done before. We are trying to do something that fits this community. And I guess the last thing I would say, you probably noticed Bill and I tend to be optimistic. We wouldn't sign up for these things if we weren't. But we also tend to be very realistic. And when it comes down to it, we're only going to do what we can afford. We're only going to do what we can pay for. And we're going to do our doggonedest to try to give something to the community, create something for the community, develop something for the community that will represent the greatest good and what people want. We won't meet everybody's needs, but we'll do our doggonedest. And we appreciate very much the feedback. And we're going to end up making a whole bunch of changes as a result of it. And you know what? We're going to have a meeting next week with another group, and they're going to give us some good ideas, and they'll go, that's maybe a little bit better idea than the one we heard at the last meeting. And that's sort of the way the process goes. So thank you very much. And Patrick, thank you.
You're very welcome.